Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu, sitting in for Riz Khan. Will the recently renewed Mideast peace talks stumble again over Israeli settlement building? New construction in the occupied territories has threatened to derail the peace process. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to extend the settlement building freeze in the West Bank, but has called for talks to continue. After an 18-month hiatus, direct negotiations between the two sides restarted earlier this month under US President Barack Obama. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says Israel must decide between peace or settlements. On today's show, we ask what concessions need to be made for direct talks between the Israelis and Palestinians to move forward. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can call in to the show or send us an SMS text message or email. Joining us to discuss the issue is from Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, an independent member of the Palestinian Legislative Council and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative, a political party. And here with me in the studio are two men who have had an insider's look at the Middle East peace process. I have with me Daniel Levy, who headed the Israeli delegation that drafted the 2003 Geneva Initiative, frequently cited as a blueprint for peace, and Gaith al-Omari, who led the drafting of the Geneva Initiative on the Palestinian side. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you to the program.
Thank you.
Let's go to Ramallah to start, to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. Dr. Barghouti, we had that deadline that was coming for the Israelis to either lift or extend the moratorium. The Israelis have decided to lift the moratorium and settlement construction can restart in the occupied territories. Do you think it's time for the Palestinians, as they have threatened, to walk away from these talks?
Absolutely. Because I think if Palestinians remain on the negotiating table while Israel continues to expand settlements at very high speed, they would be just providing a cover to the Israeli side, which is, while negotiating, is imposing unilaterally its facts on the ground. Practically, Israel, by settlement activities, is killing the last opportunity for two-state solution. And it's not just building the settlements, it's building the network of roads, it's building the apartheid wall, the combination of which is nothing but transformation of the whole idea and concept of a Palestinian state into clusters of ghettos and pantostans, and a system, a full-fledged system of apartheid. Allowing settlements to continue and still negotiate looks like a situation where two sides are negotiating over a piece of cheese. One side is looking at it and talking, and the other side is eating it up while they are negotiating. At the end, there will be nothing left to negotiate about. This is exactly the reality of negotiations while settlements continue. And I must say here that Israel had the guts to resume settlement buildings at this terrible speed only because the world community, and especially the United States, has failed to exercise what it has promised, that they will pressure Israel to stop settlement activities. This was included in the roadmap as early as 8 or 9 years ago, and still the world community did not have the guts to tell Israel enough is enough, and you cannot be impunitive to international law.
Okay.
The outcome is the failure of this process.
Okay, let me go to Daniel Levy here with me in the studio. From what we're hearing Dr. Barghouti say there, this is a very nascent process which was initiated by the United States. Is it now in danger of collapsing?
It clearly is in danger of collapsing, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. I also don't think we should make the mistake of thinking that if one does get past this hurdle and one finds in a week's time, whatever the muddle through, that the parties are still talking, that this is a great achievement and now we're just one step away from peace. What you had 10 months ago is not a settlement freeze as called for by the American side and the international community. You had a partial moratorium, and in fact a partial moratorium designed and accepted, of course, by the Israeli Prime Minister. There were exemption clauses in East Jerusalem, 3,000 units already under construction. So interestingly enough, what we're really discussing is the ask from the Israeli Prime Minister to continue a partial moratorium that he himself designed, and that his coalition, and it's a coalition of choice, he could have a more centrist, moderate coalition with Kadima, not with the far right, that his coalition accepted. So he's being asked to extend that. I think, though, it's part of a broader framing problem, that you make the settlement freeze, or even partial freeze, part of a peace process. And it would probably be wiser to say settlements are illegal, whatever else is going on, they shouldn't happen, there should perhaps be consequences for maintaining this settlements. But everyone has bought in to this strange framing where something that is internationally illegal is connected to a peace process, and that applies to the Arab states, to Israel, to the international sponsors, of course.
Okay, I want to get back to that point in a moment, but let me ask Gaith al-Omari here with us in the studio as well. What are the options now for President Abbas?
I actually believe there are no options. I mean, the two options that are, either you continue with the negotiations or you walk out. Walking out of the negotiations will come with a very heavy diplomatic and international price. Right now, it will be seen again as the Palestinians walking out prematurely. And from a strategic Palestinian perspective, and this is where I would disagree with Dr. Barghouti, is if you walk out, what do you achieve? On the one hand, the settlements will continue, with or without you on the table. If you take it as your premise that the two-state solution is in the Palestinian national interest and the only way to achieve it is through negotiations, then there's no option but to negotiate. And here I would agree with Daniel. Desegregate the issues. Settlements are illegal and pressure has to continue on stopping the settlements. However, you should not link it, and you should not, in a sense, cut your nose to spite your face.
Well, let's put that question to Dr. Barghouti. Dr. Barghouti, what would be achieved by a walkout on the Palestinian side?
The first achievement will be that the Palestinian Authority will get out of this tunnel, which it has put itself in, where they are ready to stay on the negotiating table, whatever the conditions are. And they will stop becoming a cover for occupation and for this continuation of the creation of apartheid system. I totally disagree with what Gaith said, that if we walk out, what will happen. Let me remind you with what was written just 2 days ago in Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper. They indicated that the largest settlement expansions happened exactly at the time when Israel was in negotiations. After Camp David, Begin created 100 new settlements. After Oslo agreement, Rabin made sure to create the bypass roads. Netanyahu created the Abu Ghneim settlement, Har Huma, after his deal in Y River. The issue here is that when Israel is pressured by the international community, that affects clearly the settlement building and the behavior of Israelis. And now in this peace process, they feel totally relaxed, they feel totally covered. And now they are imposing their condition one after the other. The issue is not just about settlements. The issue is about the fact that they are creating new facts on the ground, and then Palestinians have to adjust to that. Now they try to impose on Palestinians land swap. This is an adjustment to the fact that there are big settlements. Later, there will be so many settlements in the occupied territories that Palestinians have to adjust to the fact that they will not have a real state, but clusters of ghettos separated from each other. There is an alternative to that, and the alternative is to say to the world community, enough is enough. We might declare our state unilaterally on 67 borders, and if you want a Palestinian state, recognize that. There is another alternative, which is to create strong boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign that the Palestinian Authority should join, and make the world realize that we are here struggling for our freedom against occupation, against apartheid, and we are not becoming partners of the creation of an apartheid system and providing a cover for that.
So, Gaith al-Omari, is that an acceptable alternative to say enough is enough and we are now going to declare a unilateral state?
I think, look, let me just take it one step back. I agree with Mustafa that pressure has to continue in terms of settlements. I disagree with the tactics. I don't think that walking out will create that pressure. I think once you're in, and we have seen an administration here that is from the beginning focusing on the issue of settlements, I think we can create pressure in different ways. I actually believe, yes, in theory, the other options, be it civil disobedience, be it one of the other issues, in theory it looks good. In practice, I just don't see it happening. I don't see the Palestinian political system geared towards that direction. And I don't see the issues as mutually exclusive either, by the way. You can continue with the negotiations and continue doing what the PA is doing today in terms of boycotting settlement products. I believe you have to separate between Israel, which is a state that has a legitimate place there, and the occupation, which is the illegitimate. You can combine these tactics, but to simply have this polar view of either all or nothing will not help us, and this is not how subtle foreign policy is played.
Daniel, when we look at the United States involvement in this process, here's a line from the New York Times this week, and it asks, how can the Obama administration express its opposition to settlements and not have the power to stop it?
I think it's a question of choice, Anand, and I think it's a perfectly valid question ask that's being made there. And one can certainly understand, as Dr. Barghouti talks about what has gone on at the same time as the peace process. In 1993, when we had the first ceremony on the White House lawn, there were, in the West Bank alone, not including East Jerusalem, 111,000 Israeli settlers. Today that number is over 300,000. We would be in a very different place in terms of our ability to get a deal today, where we still just be talking about 100,000. So the fact that one's never brought a stop to this has almost collapsed the possibility of two states. I think it's a question of political will on the part of the United States. I would argue that you're not actually doing Israel, let alone the Palestinians, of course, any favors by avoiding a moment of choice. And if we again find ourselves in the coming days back at the table without having to make a clear choice, Israel has to choose. Will it be the settler state that is undemocratic or un-Jewish or both? By the way, for me as a Jew, a quintessential Jewish value is the universal value of humanity, of democracy, of everyone being able to live a decent life. So I think occupation is fundamentally both un-Jewish and undemocratic. Not creating a moment of choice for Israel does no favors to Israel. It's got Israel into this place where it may well be impossible to create two separate political entities that are stable, that are sustainable, because getting a hackneyed, butchered Palestinian state isn't going to be anyone's interest.
Okay, lots more to talk about, but we have to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll look at how the Israeli settlement issue is creating greater divisions within the Palestinian leadership. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the Middle East peace talks and whether the latest row over Israeli settlements will throw the process off course. I'm joined from Ramallah by Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, an independent Palestinian politician. And here in Washington, D.C., we have Daniel Levy, co-director of the Middle East Task Force at the New America Foundation, a D.C. think tank, and Gaith al-Omari, advocacy director for the American Task Force on Palestine. Let's get back to the discussion. Gaith al-Omari, let me start with you here. Has the Palestinian position been undermined not just by the divisions between Fatah in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza, but also by divisions within the Palestinian leadership on the West Bank as well?
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly, and on two levels. I mean, one level of the division is a matter of conviction. You see someone like Dr. Barghouti, who I have no doubt strongly believes in his views, and others who strongly are, with understandable reasons, afraid of going into a process where the settlements continue. You have others who are willing to take or think of it in terms of opportunity rather than risk. But you have another level of division, which I find more troubling, which is a degree of posturing and populism that you see by some politicians who think that the harder line that they take, the more popular they become and will enhance their future chances for leadership. That's risky. That's dangerous. So I think while the former, where you have a healthy debate, is actually quite good for the Palestinians to show the world and to show their own people that we have a lively debate and that the decisions that are being made are difficult decisions in the face of real domestic opposition, the latter might be problematic.
Okay, Dr. Barghouti, do you believe that to be the case, that this appeal to populism from certain leaders among the Palestinians in order to become leaders in the future is actually undermining the Palestinian position, dividing them?
I don't think this is the case today. I could argue that some Palestinian leaders think that if they surrender to the Israelis or to the American pressure, they make themselves more acceptable to the international community. But I wouldn't use these terms. I think we have a serious difference here, and the problem is that the negotiations are happening in a situation of totally inequitable situation. From one side, Israel is very strong, the Palestinian leadership is very weak. Each time we say something, Israel should make a certain concession, the United States and other countries say, but Israel has a coalition, it could collapse because Israel has a democracy. What about the Palestinian people? What about the Palestinian political forces? Today, the vast majority of the Palestinians in West Bank and in the diaspora and in Gaza, as well as the vast majority of political forces, including those in the PLO, are against continuing negotiations while settlements continue, and the leadership still continues. So there is a very, very clear contradiction here between the leadership and the people it represents. And it is unacceptable to say we have to please the Israeli constituency, but the Palestinian constituency doesn't matter. That is unacceptable. And that's where, in my opinion, what we need is a Palestinian coalition, a unified position, where Palestinian forces are all represented in a coalition, which is on democratic basis. And of course, that would provide not only participation, but this will also strengthen the Palestinian position. One more issue I want to say here. We are not opposing continuing negotiations while settlements happen because we are against peace. We ourselves have been before parts of Palestinian talks, Palestinian-Israeli talks and peace processes. But we are against a situation which has appeared during the last 17 years where the peace process has become the substitute to peace, and where the peace process has become a cover for Israeli de facto establishment of an apartheid system. What we witness here is the evaporation of the possibility of two-state solution because of Israeli behavior. And that should be stopped. Or we should be honest with ourselves and say to each other, enough is enough. Okay, two states will not happen. Let's turn to one-state solution with full democratic rights for Palestinians and Israelis, where they should live together with equal rights and equal duties. This is exactly what's happening. But to think that Palestinians could or ever accept to be slaves of occupation and apartheid, and if they say no, they would be accused of making or declaring populist actions, I don't think that is acceptable. At the end of the day, let me remind you, when Egypt negotiated with Britain becoming independent, they didn't allow the British to decide their borders. In this case, there are no terms of reference in this process. Israel is deciding the terms of reference because the international community is failing to say international law should be the terms of reference.
Okay, when we look at support in each side's respective constituencies, Daniel Levy, on the Israeli side, how much support is there for a two-state solution?
There remains majority Israeli support for a two-state solution. There's deep skepticism as to whether that's possible. Another interesting factor is if it's Benjamin Netanyahu who leads an agreement, actually that support grows even stronger. However, and I think this is the decisive factor, and it's where there's validity in the question just posed by Dr. Barghouti. The settler movement, 500,000 Israelis now live beyond the Green Line in the 67 territories. The settler movement is a very powerful political constituency in Israel, in many of the political parties, from the center to the far right. There is a strong settler constituency. And the question is there an Israeli government that is both convinced that it wants to and is willing to go up against this powerful settler community, or, as is the case if that doesn't happen, is there an Israeli government that's going to say, you know what, we can't remove the 500,000 people, we can't even remove 150,000 of them, we're going to have to create a democratic dispensation for everyone here. Probably the only way you can get around that and create the right incentive and disincentive structure is to acknowledge that there is an asymmetry here. And that's what the peace process just doesn't acknowledge. And it's a problem.
Right.
An asymmetry between a powerful occupying state and no longer a national liberation movement, as we started with the PLO. Formally it's still the PLO, but actually the negotiating partner is now a partial self-governing entity dependent on Israel and the international sponsors. But the international sponsors, rather than saying there's an asymmetry, let's balance it by creating disincentives for Israel to keep the status quo and incentives to move forward, they're actually making the imbalance, the asymmetry, even stronger with the role that the US tends to play.
Okay, you know, it always comes back to settlements, and Gareth al-Omari, I want to look at some facts that we pulled up here on settlements. And the whole idea of a freeze that we've been talking about, or partial moratorium, it appears in many respects to be a myth that is perpetuated not just by the Israelis, but also by the Palestinians. And we have a graphic that we put together that shows what I mean. I mean, let's take a look. In the third quarter of 2009, that was before the restrictions were imposed, last November, there were 2,790 units under construction. Now, those are Israeli figures. In the last quarter of 2009, just before the moratorium was put in place, that figure went up to 2,955. So it went up, which indicated a bit of a surge in building just before the moratorium came into being. But in the first quarter of 2010, which was when the moratorium was in place, that figure went down to 2,517. That was just 10% less than construction before it was in place. So very little seems to have changed.
Look, there are many angles to look at this. One is arguably if the moratorium were to continue for another year, then the number would drop significantly because many of these structures were ongoing buildings and they continued. Another way of looking at it is it puts the whole current crisis in a bit of a strange perspective, in that we're fighting over a myth. In some ways, this is all about political messaging. It's all about lines in the sand. But the reality is the settlements will continue as long as there is an occupation.
Okay,
how do you deal with this? You end the occupation, and in my view, the only way is through negotiations.
Okay, I want to get a caller in very quickly. This is Gabriel calling from South Africa. Gabriel, go ahead with your question.
Good evening to you. I just want to say, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I just want to say I've been looking at this program for many, many years, actually. And when I look at all the panelists, I can see that they are in despair. So are all of us. And I want you to just seriously discuss a one-state solution and take South Africa as an example. Thank you very much.
Is South Africa an example, Daniel Levy?
Well, I think what you have today is the state of Israel, which is democratic. There's not full equality for the Palestinian Arab population inside Israel. That's something that Israel has to address. Then you have the situation in the occupied territories, which is very analogous, actually, to South Africa. The situation there is an apartheid situation. You have a tiny settler minority with a state behind it, and you have Palestinians deprived of rights, and you have this kind of self-governing entity in the middle. You can either de-apartheidize the small area or the entire area.
I'm going to have to interrupt both of you there. We've run out of time. Thank you for being with us. Remember, you can download podcasts of The Riz Khan Show from iTunes. This week we're featuring Riz's interview with US Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, Richard Holbrooke. On the next show, setting goals. World leaders meet in a high-level UN summit in New York discussing plans to deal with global poverty, hunger and disease. But can they make a difference? Make sure you tune in for that. See you next time.